The first phone call you make in a crisis tells investigators everything. It is not about what you say, it is about who you chose to call. Annie Guthrie placed a phone call shortly after the incident. Reports suggest investigators have been obsessed with that call ever since. Not for what was said, but for who answered on the other end. That person is now at the center of one of the most dramatic investigative twists in this entire case. Here is why tracing that first call matters so much in forensics. Something that is not obvious to anyone outside of law enforcement. When facing a traumatic event or a crime requiring immediate action, humans follow an unconscious hierarchy when deciding who to reach out to. That hierarchy is driven by trust, fear, and shared secrets. It is also about coordinating with someone who already knows something they should theoretically know nothing about. You call your spouse, your closest friend, or maybe your lawyer. Other times, you call the one person who can help you control the damage before the police figure out what really happened. Detectives have studied this pattern across thousands of cases, and the constant finding is that the first call is almost never random. It is usually the most honest and telling act a person commits right after a critical event. Before they can build an alibi or consult a lawyer, that initial phone call is pure reflex, and reflexes do not lie. As it turns out, Annie Guthrie's first call was not to investigators. That one detail was what triggered this entire line of inquiry. When a loved one vanishes, you assume the police either already know or are about to get involved. Choosing not to contact the police first is, in itself, a highly revealing detail. This does not immediately prove guilt. Someone in shock reaches out to a trusted person, and someone who is afraid calls whoever makes them feel safe. Detectives do not just analyze who you called, they look at the order. They study what that exact sequence reveals about the suspect's immediate state of mind. They assess whether the sequence matches someone frantic to find a missing person or someone trying to cover something up. The sequence raised serious suspicions, and that is precisely where the situation gets incredibly complicated. The person Annie dialed first was not just some random contact or a distant acquaintance. According to reports tied to the case, explaining his presence in her contact list will not be easy for the defense. He was an old associate of the Guthries, someone with a past that detectives felt they had to investigate thoroughly. According to reports, that history includes criminal records. Calling an associate with a dark past right after the incident, before talking to the police, looks incredibly suspicious. Detectives are not going to take that detail lightly. They will reconstruct their entire relationship, combing through text and call histories from months or even years ago. They will analyze how often they communicated and the actual content of any surviving messages, looking to see if their communication patterns changed drastically in the days leading up to Nancy's disappearance. All to ask a critical question that cannot be ignored. What does this person actually know? The suspect's criminal record is a thread that investigators must pull on immediately. Realizing that the first call after the event went to someone with a criminal record set off multiple alarms for detectives, that contact went straight onto the police radar. They are tracing his entire history, digging into his ties with the inner family circle. They are also investigating his exact whereabouts during those critical hours. While this does not directly accuse him of what happened to Nancy, it forces detectives to see if his past aligns with the facts. They want to know if his background contains anything that fits the working theory of the police. They want to confirm if his connection to Annie Guthrie goes far beyond the simple label of being an old family friend. The specific details of his criminal record have not been made public, but the police do not turn someone into a key suspect just for answering a phone call. This man's past must have offered significant weight, multiplying the suspicions surrounding that call. And then there is the timing, which might be even more revealing than the identity of who answered. We know investigators analyzed the exact timestamps of Annie's phone calls immediately following the incident. Not just which calls were made, but exactly when they occurred, and how long each conversation lasted, what texts they sent before and after dialing, and what the subsequent communication pattern looked like over the next few hours. This level of highly detailed analysis, reconstructing a call sequence minute by minute, is far from standard procedure. It is what investigators do when they believe the sequence itself is evidence suspecting the exact timing, and the silence between those calls reveal a story the suspect desperately tried to bury. Think about what detectives hunt for while building this meticulous reconstruction. If Annie called that family associate, let us say, 15 minutes after the incident, and did not report it to the police until minute 45, investigators want to know what happened during that half hour. Was there another secret call? Or an exchange of texts? Was that conversation with the associate before or after she tried contacting other relatives? Those silences matter just as much as the calls. Silences between calls are interpreted as windows of decision moments, to to process the situation, choose what to say, or coordinate alibis. If any of those pauses align with the timeline of the investigation, with the movement patterns or digital activity of other people involved, and with the reconstruction of the crime, the factor of timing stops being a detail and becomes solid proof. There is a behavioral principle that experienced detectives apply during these analyses, and it is worth explaining. Immediately after a crisis, people have not yet designed their alibi. They have not decided what they will tell the police. They have not talked to anyone yet about manipulating or filtering the information. They act on pure instinct and priority, and those reactions are far more honest than any lie manufactured hours later. Detectives call this the pre-narrative window, that brief period before an alibi is built. And texts, calls, and brief contacts during that time are considered highly reliable clues of what the person actually knew and feared back then. Annie Guthrie's first call occurred right at that key moment, so officers are not just analyzing who she called. They use that contact to peer into her mind during those critical minutes, understanding her worst fears and her urgent needs, and who she turned to when panic overtook any cold strategy of control. And the identity of the person who received that phone call has left investigators with serious doubts. Let us examine how relationship mapping works in criminal cases. Officers went far beyond that single call. In a federal case, analysts never examine a communication in isolation. They fully trace the history between them. Call logs, text message threads, and chats from any platform they can retrieve. That is how they reconstruct their relationship timeline. How often did they speak? When did their daily interactions spike or drop? Were there suspicious spikes in calls near the key dates of the investigation? That historical mapping revealed strange details that detectives decided to put under the microscope. A pattern of prior calls that demanded much greater scrutiny than a simple connection with a family acquaintance. The details of that pattern remain confidential, but the direction the investigation took, the fact that this suspect was named a person of interest because of the information he holds, suggests that the chat history between Annie and him went far beyond a casual social contact. It might have been some suspicious coordination around the day Nancy vanished, or perhaps a prior bond that makes sense of that first call. Something police are trying to clarify right now. But there is a very fine line here that detectives are treading with extreme care. It is one thing to be a witness because you took a call and heard something, but quite another if that same call directly implicates you in the crime, and this family associate with a criminal record could be a witness, an accomplice, or both. Authorities have not yet publicly resolved this dilemma regarding his exact role, but suspecting that he is hiding key information about Nancy's case indicates they do not view him as a mere passive recipient of a call. They treat him like someone who knows too much. That stance changes the game completely. Witnesses, after all, are simply questioned, but those who hide secrets are backed into a corner. The wording used regarding their interest in this suspect points to the second category, meaning the question isn't just about what Annie told him during that call. The real question is what he knew beforehand, whether from a prior connection to the events or what Annie shared in real time, and what he has chosen to reveal or hide from detectives. The first few hours of any criminal investigation are forensically irreplaceable. Police know this well, which is why calls and messages within that critical window receive top analysis priority. That is when evidence is tampered with. Alibis are coordinated. Suspects are tipped off, accomplices are shielded, and false narratives are constructed. By the time official investigators step in to interrogate, that critical pre-alibi window has already closed. What remains is a rehearsed version of events, but the digital record of that initial window, those calls, the texts, those instinctual contacts before anyone thought to control the narrative, remain untouched in the digital logs, and investigators can piece them back together, even when those involved have no clue how much digital evidence actually survived. If Annie Guthrie's first call was meant to coordinate, and wasn't just a sudden emotional impulse, but a strategic move, experts will be able to spot it clearly in her communication pattern. Coordination calls leave a very different trail than sheer panic. They tend to last much longer. Plus, the subsequent contact pattern reveals a clear synchronization among multiple suspects, and the gap between that call and the actual police report is usually much wider. Whether this criminal pattern shows up in Annie's logs is something detectives are already analyzing closely. This is the question the investigation keeps returning to, adding massive weight to the case. Why this person? Out of all the people Annie Guthrie could have called in those crucial first minutes, like family or close friends, a lawyer, or even the police, why did her instincts lead her to him? Why did this contact get the very first call? There are several possible explanations, ranging from a completely innocent theory to a deeply disturbing scenario. On the more innocent end of the spectrum, he was her closest confidant, the one she turns to when everything falls apart. His criminal past is long behind him and has absolutely no connection to this mystery. She called him because he is her lifeline in times of crisis. The contact was just an outlet for her emotional distress. A normal conversation, easily explained by the order of her contact list. On the troubling side, he had to be the first call because he held key details, needed updates, or they had to coordinate before the police took over completely. It wasn't a call of panic. It was purely operational. And his criminal record is no coincidence, but rather the link to the network connecting these people to Nancy's tragedy. Detectives are trying to figure out which side represents the truth. The forensic analysis they are building, combining call histories, timestamps, and relationship mapping, is revealing something that has turned this call into the most critical thread of the investigation. It's worth fully understanding the scope of the phone network analysis that police are conducting here. When detectives identify a suspicious call like this, they don't just stop at tracking the people involved. They go deeper, tracing who the suspect contacted immediately after speaking with Annie. They examine if any third party entered the calling web in the hours following the event. They map out the ripple effect of that first contact across both Annie's and the suspect's networks. This is how investigators expose potential cover-up networks. If Annie called the accomplice, and he then contacted a third party, and their logs show activity that fits the timeline perfectly, detectives have a thread linking three people in that exact same window of time. That web of communication immediately after a crime is often far more revealing than any single call, because it doesn't just show a suspect's movements, but how fast and in what direction information flowed within that group. The fact that police are reconstructing communication networks, plural, makes it clear they aren't looking at a single, isolated call. They want to know where that call led. There is a loose end in the investigation that few pay attention to the messages sent before and after dialing. Today's forensic technology doesn't just reveal the call history, but the entire context surrounding the conversation tied to that call. What text messages were sent just minutes before dialing the phone? Did Annie shoot over a text before calling, or did she dial right away? And what was said when that call ended? Was there a follow-up text, a second call, or just absolute silence? What happens right before and after a call often reveals far more than the conversation itself, especially when detectives lack a direct recording of the audio. A text sent 30 seconds earlier could show what triggered that sudden phone call, and a message sent immediately after would suggest how the talk wrapped up or what steps they took next. If the phone records show a pattern like Annie sending or receiving texts right before dialing that connect to the active police investigation, then the sequence stops looking like an isolated crisis contact and becomes part of a much larger narrative. Criminal investigators focused heavily on this exact timeline, analyzing the critical minutes right around that call. They also checked the digital activity on both devices. This entire digital trail speaks volumes about what they knew and what they intended to do. This is what homicide detectives understand about crisis psychology that the average person completely overlooks. In a genuine panic, when someone is just a terrified witness, their communication pattern is incredibly messy. You see rapid-fire, short calls filled with raw emotion rather than any useful, structured information. They desperately crave comfort, reassurance, and someone on the other end telling them exactly what to do. Their calls are chaotic because their minds are in absolute chaos. But if someone is playing a role, they will focus on controlling information, coordinating stories, and protecting themselves. This pattern is calculated. Fewer calls, longer conversations, and a deliberate sequence, almost like running through a checklist. Whether suspects realize it or not, this is a telltale behavior that police detectives know by heart. That crucial first call to a family member with a criminal record, made before dialing 911, is analyzed through this lens. Did Annie's call logs during those first critical hours look like those of a traumatized witness? Was she panicked, emotional, and looking for comfort? Or did her actions point to something more calculated? This stark contrast is exactly what criminal investigators are trying to extract from those phone records. The legal weight of the case detectives are building here demands absolute attention. If the police can prove that Annie Guthrie deliberately contacted a person of interest before talking to law enforcement, and if they can recover the context of that call through digital forensics or a witness statement, that contact becomes highly critical evidence. It could prove prior knowledge. It could prove coordination. Or it could show that information was leaked outside the investigation immediately after the crime, with the clear intent of obstructing the course of justice. On the other hand, if that phone call has a perfectly innocent explanation, maybe it was just an emotional venting session to a trusted friend, followed by complete cooperation with police detectives. It would be a dead end, allowing them to move on. But reports suggest this investigation is nowhere near that point. It is still actively being analyzed, meaning the call and the events surrounding it remain a crucial line of investigation. And here is the chilling detail that ties this entire puzzle directly to the main murder case. This case has already produced one of the most shocking forensic breakthroughs in local law enforcement history. We are talking about the moment investigators unearthed human remains in the wooded area bordering Annie Guthrie's yard. That discovery instantly upgraded the case from a missing person search to a grim homicide recovery, securing airtight evidence for trial. Now, detectives are meticulously combing through the communication logs from the moments directly after the tragedy. They are dissecting that first call, the timeline, the recipient, and the prior relationship between the two. These two paths, the physical crime scene in the yard and the digital forensic records, are not separate stories. They are simply two pieces of the exact same criminal puzzle. The physical evidence tells us what happened and where, but the phone records reveal what they knew, when they knew it, and who they told. To present a prosecutable case and file charges, you need both. Physical evidence proves that a crime occurred, but the digital evidence establishes knowledge, intent, and the conspiracy of individuals involved in the cover-up. The fact that authorities are chasing both angles simultaneously, focusing heavily on phone records, shows they know solving this requires connecting both worlds. The person who picked up that first call is now in an incredibly tight spot, legally and practically. If police believe this man is holding back critical details about Nancy's disappearance, they have tools to force his hand. A grand jury subpoena demands testimony, under oath. Refusing to speak without pleading the fifth is contempt of court. If the recipient withheld details from the police, they face serious obstruction charges. And if their own call records, phone history, and everything they did afterward, or their history with the family reveals clues that investigators have already uncovered, the chess game of what to share and what to hide gets incredibly messy. People who get calls from suspects in a criminal case face a choice. They can cooperate fully and tell investigators everything. They can lawyer up and remain completely silent. Or they can try playing the middle ground, giving police just enough to avoid trouble while protecting themselves. That third path is the most dangerous. It leads to lies, and lies invite deep suspicion. That scrutiny invites a deeper look. And for someone with an existing criminal record, who took that first call from Annie Guthrie after the incident, and who police think is hiding key detail, it is a place nobody ever wants to be. But let us look at exactly where this lead stands. Reports suggest detectives have now made that phone call from Annie Guthrie the absolute center of their case. The man who answered, a longtime family associate with a criminal record, is viewed by investigators as a key holder of crucial information. The exact timing, duration, and context of that call have already undergone intense forensic analysis. Investigators have likely rebuilt the entire history between Annie Guthrie and this suspect. Whether this shows complicity, prior knowledge, or outright obstruction remains unconfirmed. The case is still active. The forensic puzzle is still being pieced together, but the direction is obvious. Federal agents do not make a single phone call the center of their case without finding something massive. That call revealed something. The texts and calls surrounding it did too. Their shared history yielded clues. Exactly what those are will surface when this case moves to the next phase, a phase that, given the progress of forensic evidence found in the backyard, might be much closer than the public realizes. Here is one final detail on the psychology of this moment. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance and the criminal case have reached a point where the questions are no longer abstract. Whispers of human remains are circulating. There are call logs raising serious questions about who knew what and when. And there is a suspect who answered that key call, the man police believe is holding the ultimate secret. The answers are out there. Right now, they are sitting in a crime lab, waiting on DNA. They are locked in a phone record that has been meticulously rebuilt, piece by piece. And they depend on what that old family associate decides to confess or hide when police force him to speak. Sooner or later, the dots connect. DNA will confirm the identity, while phone records secure the criminal indictment. And that suspect will make a choice about cooperating that could either save him or destroy him entirely. Only then will the truth of what happened to Nancy Guthrie, and who chose to stay silent, finally come to light. That first call Annie Guthrie made after the incident might seem like a minor detail at first glance, but in cases this massive, that initial call is often the single thread that unravels the entire cover-up, and they are pulling.